We're exploring the fourth foundation of mindfulness, which is the teaching on the Dhammas, or universal categories of phenomena. And these categories can all be seen as different doors that are pointing to the same thing. Different methods of liberating the mind where each part leads to the whole. Last time we looked at the 5 aggregates of clinging as a framework for understanding the building blocks of identification and how ego clinging leads to suffering. The next door, the next Dhamma, invites us to look deeply into our sensory experience. And this is the teaching on the 6 internal and external sense bases and the fetters that arise in dependence on them. So let's have a look at what this means. First of all, what are the 6 sense spheres? We know of hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and seeing. And in Buddhism, thoughts and mental phenomena are considered to be the 6th sense. We often think of thoughts as who we are, or that our sense experience happens to our thinking process. But when we look closely, we see that thoughts are just another aspect of our experience. We can think of thoughts as mental sensations. We see that all 6 senses actually appear to and happen within awareness itself. We can become conscious of these sensations just as we're conscious of sound and sight and so on. And in this ability to observe thoughts without getting lost in them lies a great deal of freedom. You can do a short experiment right now by shifting your awareness to your hands. Just notice what's happening in your hands in this moment. There's bound to be some activity, perhaps feelings of temperature, sensations in the nerve endings. Just feel the aliveness in the hands. And then reflect on the fact that this activity is going on all the time. But if our attention and awareness isn't looking there, we don't notice it. You were probably not aware of your hands just a minute ago. And in the same way, thoughts are like mental sensations. Since we're in the habit of paying attention to thoughts in our head all the time, they become predominant. This is what we notice. And through awareness practice, through mindfulness, we allow thinking to go into the background by coming back to our senses and back to the awareness that is aware. Okay, so there are external sense objects and what we might call internal sense organs, corresponding to each of our senses. For example, there are sound waves and eardrums, odorant particles and nostrils, physical form and nerve endings, and so on. And when we become aware of the contact between these two, we have a sensory experience. The contact between sense object and sense organs, together with attention, constitute the conditions for sense consciousness to arise. And if we look closely, we see that our entire lives are made up of the play of sense experience, arising and passing in different combinations. And the path to liberation lies in bringing mindfulness to the nature of this orchestra, without getting caught in interpretation and projection. In the words of the 3rd Chinese patriarch of Zen, the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. Now, this sounds simple enough, but as we know, is not easy, because we form preferences about pretty much everything. And this leads to the next part of the instruction, which is about the fetters that arise independent on our sense experience. The fetters are the defilements that obstruct our vision and block our ability to see things as they are. When we don't receive reality with an open awareness, our experience gets filtered through our judgments and preferences. And this is how we generate a sense of self to whom everything is happening. We want to control, change, tweak, improve the experience according to the will of this subject, according to the preferences of the self. So the orchestra is playing along just fine, but we forget about the music and our mind gets narrow and fixated. It's this clenching and clinging that separates us from the freedom that is inherent in us. Whether we call this freedom nirvana or heaven on earth. And to continue the quote from Sengtsan, talking about this ultimate dimension. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, then hold no opinions for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind. The instructions of mindfulness invite us to be aware of how these fetters or defilements arise, how they can be removed, and how they can be prevented. So, how do the fetters come to be? What is it that separates us from our true nature? The basic answer is ignorance. We ignore the impermanence and impersonal nature of sensory phenomena, and we lose track of this simplicity of what we call the Great Way. As we've seen, sense experience leads to the emergence of feeling tones toward which we form preferences. We don't let the sense experience play out without hindrance. Instead, we begin to crave after pleasant feelings and form aversion toward unpleasant ones. It's almost as if we form a clenched fist in the mind in order to hold on and try to control our experience. And this identification with preferences is the beginning of clinging, which gives rise to the fetters. In this way, the 6 sense spheres make up the root link in the chain of dependent origination. And bringing mindfulness to this crucial link provides an opportunity to cut the chain at this level and interrupt what otherwise leads to reactive behavior. The reason this is so crucial is because we largely live in reactivity. We wake up in the morning and we react to our need to go to the bathroom. We think about the demands of the day and we react with worry or anxiety. We feel the urge for caffeine and we go for the coffee. We read the news and we have various emotional reactions. We meet other people that trigger reactions in us. We encounter stressful circumstances, causing us to react instinctively, and this goes on and on. When we live in reactivity, there is little room for receptivity and reflection. We don't allow ourselves to feel into what is happening inside, and we don't allow space to digest our experience. So, shifting from reactivity to receptivity, from reacting to responding, is what cutting the chain looks like. And mindfulness is the tool that enables this shift. There is nothing we need to do to become non-reactive. In fact, it's more a matter of releasing the doing, of learning to drop back into this knowing quality that is an inherent part of every experience. And this part of our being is receptive and non-reactive by nature. And from this spacious place inside, we naturally feel what the appropriate response is. So how do we translate this teaching into practice? At the most basic level, we're training our attention to become aware of sense impressions. Let's do another quick experiment. Pick a sense, I suggest hearing, and just notice the experience. Open up to sounds in your environment. Notice how there's an external object, something making a sound out there, and an internal sense organ, which is your ears, your eardrums. And notice how the sense experience arises as a result of paying attention to the contact between the two. See if you can stay with the experience at the sensory level without following the pull to go off into analysis or distraction. Just let the experience change, sounds appearing in space, no outside, no inside. Just allowing sounds to move in the field of awareness. And now move your attention to another sense, perhaps seeing. Look around in the room and notice how the entire experience shifts from the world of hearing to the world of seeing. Right? So being aware of the chain at this level is like decoding the mechanics of suffering. As we go about our day, we can build a habit to bring awareness back to our senses, back to the contact. In fact, wherever we find ourselves, there is an opportunity to address the so-called fetters. We can become mindful of the sense contact, the feeling quality, the emotional push, and even clinging itself. And there's a great deal of freedom in realizing that we can bring mindfulness and curiosity to any of the links in the chain. Once we can hold the experience in an open awareness, we're no longer caught. It's like becoming disenchanted and released from a grip. This is what irritation feels like. What happens if I observe it? What happens to craving as I remain mindful of it? We see that it arises, it changes, and it eventually passes away by itself. And this is a crucial point in our practice, is that we see that we don't have to act on our impulses. This is the freedom that mindfulness enables. Even short moments of mindfulness can really interrupt these deeply ingrained habits and behavior. In Tibetan Buddhism, they say that the way to freedom consists of short glimpses many times throughout our day. So we're invited to pay attention to these short glimpses of freedom, to really take in the experience and to install this new understanding and way of being and relating. And this can be experienced as this letting go of our clenched fist in the mind. It can really be a sense of relief, like breathing out. Phew. Another crucial link in the chain of reactivity is perception. The word from Latin, perceptio, means gathering or receiving. And this gathering or receiving happens automatically based on our sensory experience. We can't help but interpret our experience. And as we explored in the 5 skandhas, perception co-arises with feeling and informs our volitions and reactions. So there's nothing wrong with perceptions in themselves. The problem arises when we take them to be absolute and confuse them with reality itself, confusing the map with the territory. This causes us to lose track of the aliveness of our direct sensory experience. It's like getting caught at the level of concepts and ideas, and our entire worldview gets colored by them. That we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. So perceptions can be seen as conditioned responses based on past experiences and karmic circumstances. And these reactions to our ongoing experience further conditions these perceptions in the mind. So understanding the mechanics of this process can really help us see how the fetters arise and how they can be prevented. On one level, our perceptions are determined by the fact that we're born as human beings. Our sensory apparatus largely dictates and limits how we perceive the world. Just think about animals, for example, and the different sensory sensitivities that different animals have. I mean, they clearly perceive the same reality quite differently from us. And yet we often assume that our limited senses give us an accurate view of some objective reality that is just out there. Perceptions are also conditioned by our genes as well as our upbringing, by nature as well as nurture. Some perceptions are formed consciously, like certain beliefs and opinions. Others comes from the depth of the unconscious, which may include ancestral traumas, archetypal forces, and deep intuitional patterns of behavior. For example, you might hear a piece of music or smell some peculiar scent, and all of a sudden all kinds of associations arise. Perhaps you're taken back to a memory and all kinds of thoughts, emotions, and visions are brought back alive, and you have no idea how this association is made or why it was triggered. And this is an example of how perceptions affect the psyche, affect our experience. And the perceptions, whether conscious or unconscious, can give rise to defiling emotions like hatred, lust, and ignorance, which in turn reinforces the conditioning. It's not that we have to fight or get rid of perceptions. As we said, they arise naturally based on sense contact. But mindfulness can really help us see through perceptions. When we're mindful, we no longer confuse them for some absolute reality. Rather than strengthening the condition, we start a process of deconditioning. We retrain our perceptions. We reframe our experience in ways that are more helpful, in ways that lead to joy and happiness and freedom. There are many ways in which our perceptions lead us astray. The Buddha highlighted 4 ways that are particularly strong and fundamental to our suffering. The first is that we take what's impermanent to be permanent. And this is something we explored at length in the frame on the 5 skandhas. When we don't see the nature of change, we don't allow things to play out naturally. We easily get caught in clinging and aversion. And the teaching really points us to experience this truth for ourselves, to really see deeply into the nature of impermanence. It's not sufficient to have an intellectual understanding of it. Secondly, we take what's unattractive to be attractive. Beauty is a magical aspect of existence, but when we get caught up in ideas and obsessions, we lose the ability to appreciate natural beauty. The experience of true beauty can be found in a sunset, in music, in poetry, in the arts, in geometry, but it requires a presence of mind, a stillness, an ability to receive this beauty. And we're not exactly encouraged to abide in this openness, and we're not trained to really and fully take in this experience of true beauty. Our culture, for example, is obsessed with youth and perfection, and huge industries work to uphold beauty standards that have very little to do with the actual and deeper beauty of life. We're trained to strive for ideals without considering the side effects on an individual, social, and ecological level. So this is one area where we can retrain our perception. We can learn to see that there is beauty in aging. There's beauty in the naturalness of things. There's beauty in impermanence. Third, the Buddha said that we take suffering to be happiness. This is interesting. We're confused about what makes us happy. We think that the fulfillment of sense desires is what brings happiness, and we don't see that this very belief is what often leads to destructive behavior and suffering. We can all relate, I think, to the misery caused by addictive behavior and the restless search after fleeting hits and highs when there's no peace of mind, there's no open-heartedness. So, in a sense, we get it backwards. We think of fulfillment of sense desires as happiness, and we think of renunciation as suffering. We might imagine a lack of stimulants as some kind of torture or deprivation. But renunciation can truly be a source of deeper peace and happiness. And fundamentally, renunciation is not about giving up pleasure, but about giving up our attachments to the strategies we use to get pleasure. So the spiritual quest, if you will, is largely about finding out that true happiness is really found inside, that it's part of our inner essence. And the last misperception is taking what is non-self to be self. We continually create and maintain an image of who we are, to whom everything is happening. This is, again, a process we explored in detail in the 5 aggregates of clinging. We identify with passing mind states. We mistake emotions for who we are, and we reinforce this self-image through the stories that we tell ourselves. And in this way, we superimpose a whole structure of self on top of experiences that are ultimately impermanent and impersonal. And through mindfulness, we begin to see that this image is an illusion, or it's a construct that is largely based on survival strategies and subconscious conditioning. And by bringing loving awareness and mindfulness to the root level of our experience, we gain the insight that this conditioning can be retrained. This is the power of mindfulness. As Joseph Goldstein says, mindfulness is the magic of mastering our perceptions. It's like taking control of the mechanics of conditioning and using it to train our perceptions based on insights about what brings happiness, based on wisdom. We train to perceive impermanence, to perceive non-self, and to perceive the nature of happiness through every experience. And over time, these skillful perceptions increase our agency by enabling us to go from reacting to receiving, reflecting, and responding wisely. We cultivate the knowing quality of the mind, the witness, the part that is naturally receptive, non-reactive, and non-attached. By abiding in this place of witnessing the orchestra of sense perceptions, we refine our mindfulness. We observe the coming and going of sense experience with clarity, aware of the nature of all appearances within the field of awareness. As our mind comes to stillness, we experience a silence. And from this place of silence, we gain access to what we might call subtle perceptions, intuitions, and insights that have a very different quality and feel to them, because they don't originate from our 6 sense spheres or from the self-image. They arise directly out of the silence, the emptiness, or the nothingness, out of what is. Through mindfulness, we're expanding this silence, we're lengthening the spaciousness between sense impressions. And so we make room for more and deeper insights to emerge. And so this is the process of becoming selfless, of crossing over to the other shore.